Okay, so thank you, everybody. We'll be going through some of the changes that you see in your system that is live as of this morning, the 5/21/34 release. Name, hopefully, as you know, is Scott, and we are Bobber. Okay, so some of the things that we will be talking about today are the updates to how source cost is handled related to the ping post consent API and dynamic consent forms, updates to post reject second chance options there, some updates to the consent settings for partners and how you can handle the company information, how that is displayed. We have updates to the boberdoo form builder with regards to both post reject second chance, trusted form integration, and the redirect URL widgets. And then some updates to how ping post consent behaves with regards to some optional services at Bobber. So lots to go through here today. We're going to jump right into it. I'll be bouncing back and forth here between this slideshow and a live system that we have set up here for today. So this will be fairly informal, going through some live examples. So first up, just some things of note. So number one, when it comes to processing, the ping post lead API and the ping post consent API action behave the same when it comes to processing. This means that when a lead comes in and the boberdoo system sorts your matches. So when we talk about the sorting, it is that infographic that you see I use a lot, which is boberdoo excludes those partners that are not active, those partners that do not have available funds, and those partners that do not have a matching filter set. If there are more partners than available partners per lead set at the source level, we sort those matches. That can be by best revenue scenario, by best price, by priority, or weighted logic. The update today ties the processing logic to be the same for both ping post lead and ping post consent API. The next is as far as the actions. When you ping and post leads in, you have to have the same action on the ping and the post. So if you ping with ping post consent, you have to submit the post with the same action. If you ping with ping post consent and attempt ping post lead on the post, the lead will be rejected. So you have to have consistent actions on the ping and the post. The system will reject any mixing of those submissions. When it comes to cost, however, the ping post lead and the ping post consent APIs do behave differently. So we're going to jump into the live system here, but we'll just cover in brief what that means. So when it comes to the ping post consent API, the cost is always calculated based on the final lead price and the margin, regardless of whether or not that margin is set at the source level or the filter set levels, the filter sets of the partners. And so the final cost can change, and it can be determined by the consumer and their final choices. So if a lead is an exclusive lead, that cost is based off of that one partner and that margin. But if a lead is matched in a shared environment, let's say a partner is selected or three partners are selected, then those margins then are calculated off of those three matching partners. So if the margin is set at the source side, then that same percentage margin is applied for the entire lead sale for each one of those three partners. If the margin is set at the individual filter set, then the individual filter set margin of each of those matching partners is applied. when calculating that final cost. This is different than the ping post lead API in several ways. So one, with ping post consent, the return best price parameter is ignored. So it does not matter if your vendor sends that in the actual API or not, that calculation is done automatically. Whereas in the ping post API, that has to be submitted. Two, fixed costs is ignored as well. So with ping post consent, fixed cost is not a possibility, like it is a possibility with ping post lead. So you cannot submit mode equals full with ping post consent and submit a lead with mode equals full and a fixed cost. So for these reasons, because you can have one source set up to return a dynamic bid if they submit ping post lead API with return best price. And then you can have that same source configured if they submit mode equals full with a fixed cost. And then that same source can be configured if they submit through the API ping post consent with that same source. That same source can have 3 different costs associated with it. We would strongly suggest that you set up new sources for ping post consent. So if we look in the lead system here, we can take a look at some of those details here. We're going to be looking at the source DC affiliate more specifically. So down here at the bottom. So first off, we see this first lead was post rejected, meaning there was no match, there is no cost. The next lead came in. We see that it is a lead that came in through the dynamic consent API. We see it is a green lead log. That is our first indication. If we mouse over, we see dynamic consent API. That's our second UI indication that it is from that API. And we see that the lead is calculated at, the lead cost is calculated at $80, which is based on the margin. If we look into the lead details, we can then see that margin calculation. That next lead comes in. That is also a calculation. We then see the lead log is a different color. The mouse over does not show dynamic consent. We also see a calculation being done. So we, as we dig into it, we see that is that second example where the return best price is being submitted. So it is recalculating the source cost and returning that bid back to the vendor for that particular ping. The next lead that is submitted in, if we look at the lead log, it was a direct full mode that was submitted. However, the lead was already purchased. It could not be matched to any other partners. There is then no cost associated with that lead. Then the fourth lead that comes in, another direct post. Same type of log. We then see, again, that direct post. It satisfies any minimums. And because it was a direct post, that fixed cost that is associated with the lead of $10 is then attributed to it. Now we can dig into those source costs in the settings there, that those are all set up under the same source. But the whole point again is that in your reporting, that same source can send leads 3 different ways, all under the same source. So please, please, please set up separate sources. So this is kind of digging into those examples in a little bit more detail. The third one here or the last one here that we'll jump into is the shared example. So when we look at the next one, this is back to dynamic consent. Again, looking at that green lead log, we see that lead then was sold in a shared environment. That lead was sold for $7, $5, and then crazy enough, $0. If we look at the logs and then those calculations for the vendor or the source cost, we have the margin calculations. And then, of course, because that lead was at $0, there is no margin, 0 on 0. And so then that's how we come up with that total cost for that final shared lead. So again, cost in the ping post consent can differ significantly. The next thing that we want to cover is post rejects. So there are situations in which that initial match post rejects that lead, just like into the current situation. So the priority in which the post reject second chance is served up, the display priority is such that new matches that were not previously shown to the consumer are served up first. In the case of shared environments, shared scenarios, previously shown matches that were not selected by the consumer are then also served up to the consumer secondary. The system will continue presenting options after each post reject in a continuous fashion to the consumer until either a lead sells one time currently or all options are exhausted. Right now, the default system switch or the system setting is 5 minutes between the initial ping. That post has to be then submitted by the consumer. That is a setting that can be adjusted. One thing to consider is that if you are pinging out to other partners or buyers, is that they will also have a maximum likely on their end. So if you are going to extend any settings, you're going to want to communicate with your partners before you do to understand what their limits are so that you can align those. Currently, a ticket is required to enable the post-reject second chance in your system. So if you do want that to be done so that you can present that in the response in the API, we do have to enable that in your system. So please put in that ticket and the client services can get that done for your lead system. So we're going to take a look in the UI in a second. We also have a link to the full documentation of the post-reject processing. We do have advancements or additional processing. We will continue to try and reprocess the lead in shared scenarios up to the maximum number of times that the lead can be sold. That is on the roadmap. It's something we're working on for future releases as well. If we look at a live environment and from our form builder, And I will break a cardinal rule of a live webinar here. We can emulate a post reject essentially. So if we look at a boberdoo form, we can put some additional text to help guide a consumer in the case of a post reject. And we can go to a form. I'll make sure I'm at the right one. And so I will just go through. Obviously, I'm not a front-end developer, but if I were, this form might look a little better. And so here we see an exclusive match. This would be any TCPA language, the dynamic matching partner, any magic strings. And so before I match this lead, I'm going to just jump into this partner and deactivate this to post reject this lead. So now I see some text. The original company told you to beat feet, but this other company really wants to work with you. So testing company 8 really wants to work with you. So the idea here is then you can present next best or the next post reject scenario to the consumer to then try and monetize or still capitalize and capture that lead. Obviously, you're going to make that language a little bit softer than I would, but the idea here is that you can still then present that that next best match or that next ping scenario to the consumer. So moving on, you saw there some partner information that was returned back to the consumer. You may have all kinds of company information in boberdoo of how you associate the company. You may have encrypted language. You may have the companies referred as different names or different different terms, things like that. Companies may give you specific legal company names that they need to be displayed to the consumer. So boberdoo has released with this update a consent settings tab. It renames and offers new functionality of the HTML offer tab of the partner settings. So there is a display priority for the partner company information. First and foremost, if you have a custom delivery assigned in the filter set and there is company information returned in the custom delivery, that takes the priority and is returned in the response or to the form, first and foremost. Secondly, if there is information populated in the seller company name of the consent settings, that is returned in the response. And then the partner company information is used only if there is nothing else configured. We also have seller company phone and HTML offer, which can be populated and can be then used to enhance the offer. You've probably seen this in some of our previous webinars, so that you can either return that information. In many cases, you may use that to try and monetize or research that a consumer may do. So you can charge, for example, if they're going to call the companies directly, or the HTML offer can be used to return taglines, the best roofing contractor in Madison, Wisconsin, things like that. And finally, you definitely want to return or review your partner account information, company information, so that you know what is being returned in the response for these companies in one. So if we look in the lead system here, you may notice in my system, I have partner primary and secondary labels set up for 1-to-1. Those are simply labels that are set up in the settings and then can be associated with different partners. Just from an organizational standpoint, helps me see at a glance which ones require and which ones don't. If we look here, when we go in, we see consent settings. Again, that replaces that HTML. If I click in here, I see that seller company name. I can then replace, and this is what would be used in that, in replace of that company information. And then again, this is that HTML that can be then also returned in the response or to the boberdoo forms in the dynamic set. All right. So that brings us to the form builder. So we've covered some of the different options with the form builder. One of the big changes is that it is dependent on what happens with that individual lead, whether there was a match, no match, or whether that match was exclusive or shared. One of the big things that we wanted to point out is that the magic strings in the TCPA text are there to dynamically populate the company information. So that magic string partner company name will populate exactly those things that we just covered there. The consent settings, company, seller company name. This partner company name field will populate in the TCPA text for the exclusive match. So if you do not include that in the language, then you won't have it dynamically inserted. So you want to make sure that you include that in there. The second thing we'll take a look at, we look at very briefly there, is if you do have the second chance enabled, you will want to populate some text to help guide the consumer. If they do encounter a post reject, it would only appear if they did encounter that situation. There is the option of what to do if there is no matches on a ping. And then what do you want to do? Do you want to redirect them to a click offer, or do you want to collect the lead and continue on as a standard submission? And if you do, what is the TCPA text that you are going to have that consumer agree to? Is that some text to the landing page, to your company? And that's something that you should consider, have your legal team review. And then the redirect widget example. So with the forms, if you have a matching partner that returns a redirect URL in the response, the boberdoo URL can grab that and redirect the partner automatically. And then lastly, we'll take a look at the trusted form in the system as it relates to the boberdoo form, and then how that plays with the outside services integration. So when we go into the form builder itself, sorry. We will stick with this one here. So as I mentioned initially, that TCPA text for the exclusive match, that partner company name is that magic string that I was referring to. You want to make sure that you have that in this section here for sure. Number two is if the second chance switch is enabled, this is the new field that appears here. This is the text that you can populate. This was what you saw that appeared in the live example that we looked at that I populated. And so you want to play around with that. And then we have the TCPA text for no matches. So that would be something that you'll want to make sure that you populate if it's not already done so. So when we look at the redirect, a redirect example, it is based on the buyer. So this can be set up as a standard form or as a dynamic consent form. And it is going to be dependent on how you collect the lead. So in some cases, the lead can be set up where you are collecting the entire lead and submitting the whole lead into boberdoo to then be pinged out. After the lead is submitted into boberdoo, that would be the case where you are only selling to networks or to brokers and no retail buyers of your own. Because in that case, you do not need to present, presumably, any you do not need to present any matching consumers or any matching contractors to the consumer, because you're going to redirect the consumer regardless. You're only submitting the lead in for the best bid amongst the brokers or the networks, if you will. So in that case, it is a standard form just under the current flow that it is now. However, we have clients that have some retail contractors in their system. And so in that case, when that lead is submitted into the system, they may have situations where they want to know whether or not their best scenario is that best scenario their retail contractors to serve up to the consumer and allow the consumer to pick amongst those retail contractors? Or is it simply that one exclusive home improvement network and then to redirect the consumer to that one network set of contractors through the widget or the redirect URL. And so because those different scenarios can possibly exist, and it may exist from an individual lead by lead basis, that is where the each lead can be evaluated. So the idea is, we'll go into when we look at our use cases, is that you can set up these partners, and each lead that is submitted is evaluated independently. Now, when you're looking at your forms, you have to decide whether or not you want that form to be, evaluating your best revenue scenario, or your best scenario, or whether it is a standard submission into the just those networks to be then redirected regardless, because you can't have it both ways. You either have to present the consumer with retail matching partners in real time, or keep it as a standard form. So there's only two options there. As far as the process goes, it still is a custom delivery that you would set up as a custom delivery in the filter step. There is no change there. And then so the thank you pages are set up to be essentially matched redirects, very similar to what you see there. And then the match gets replaced with the dynamic URL of the actual matched network themselves. So Angie Networks, HomeU. And so if you are working with those can be shown in tests in your system if you have a form set up with your integrations in your publisher accounts. So the trusted form. So for trusted form, one-to-one verify. The forms have a simple option to enable the certificates. This is the publisher script that produces the trusted form certificate. So when this is enabled, that produces the trusted form cert on the form, so that you see it just like you saw the one we just submitted here. That ties in with the outside service. So outside services, again, is a bring your own credentials. So you have the account with Active Prospect and can add outside services here. So if we look at the integration rules, you can choose when it runs, what sources are associated with running this service. And then when we look at the tagging, the auto tagging on the form is to these language, one-to-one, success, and then the advertiser name. So you can look for those to be, for example, only true. And if that is not found when this lead is called in this service, then the lead is automatically rejected. So this allows you to ensure that you only purchase one-to-one verified leads automatically in your lead purchasing flow. All right. So that's going to bring us to those one-to-one use cases. We're going to cover them at a fairly high level here. And we do have documentation on these. The idea is that these are not mutually exclusive, as we just said. You can mix and match, and there may be cases where you can use them in combined. So when we look at the lead system, again, I think labeling does a lot to help visually group them. First off, we have the exclusive retail company. So the idea is that this is a direct lead buyer. The seller lead company, as the FCC defines it, they are the ones going to be contacting the consumer. That requires one-to-one consent. They would typically be getting a lead posted into their system, and they require exclusive leads. So typically you would be returning their company information and dynamically inserting that into the TCPA text, as opposed to one of the companies being displayed for a checkbox to the consumer to be selected. That would be as opposed to shared retail, which is the next two options that we see here. The shared retail we have split up amongst no one-to-one required and one-to-one required, because you may have some buyers that do not require one-to-one consent and some that do. So shared being just that, those that do not require an exclusive lead purchase. That means that opens them up to more potential scenarios, ping scenarios coming into the system. And that also would be ones where they would have checkboxes next to them, to the consumer, so that they can be selected and receive their information only when the consumer selects it. When you look at those that we have tagged as one-to-one required, we have only accept dynamic consent leads checked, so that only leads with the dynamic consent API or forms are eligible to be sold to this partner. Whereas these partners that are in blue are eligible for both the ping post consent and ping post lead API. We now have the exclusive broker scenario. So this exclusive broker scenario does not require one-to-one consent. And in this, it relates to the custom delivery. So when we look at the exclusive broker scenario, the important thing here is that the filter set is exclusive, meaning that when this is a matching partner, you are only going to serve up the matching partners from this broker and no others. So you can only consider the matching companies from this scenario. But you are going to return all of the matching companies, or can return multiple matching companies from this broker. The kicker is that you are going to, when you do match to this broker, is that you are considering this bid for the entire scenario. So this broker bids for the entire scenario for all of their companies in one bid. And so if they bid $30 for the lead, they're bidding $30 for the whole scenario, whether there's one partner, two partners, or five partners being returned in their response. That limits their matching scenarios, right, to that one exclusive. And that differs from the shared scenario broker in several different ways. The shared scenario broker returns an individual bid for each matching company in their response. And that allows them to be part of more matching scenarios. Because they return an individual bid for each company in their response, they can then participate in more matching scenarios. And so they can then be returned back to the consumer in more initial scenarios and then also in more post-reject scenarios. So that opens them up to more combinations and being part of more combinations with other shared brokers, as opposed to this exclusive broker, which is only part of that one exclusive scenario. We then have the network with redirect widget, or the broker with redirect widget as well. It's been primarily the home improvement networks to date. Those are exclusive as well. They can only be matched exclusively if they do accept the post. They then return in their response a additional parameter of a redirect URL, which then is used to redirect that consumer or present a widget to them, which contains the matching contractors for that request. The important thing here is that the lead sale is complete upon the success response from that partner and not upon a successful redirect at all. That is, and after the fact, the success response is what completes the transaction. One thing is that when you are putting in tickets or referring to partners, identifying what type of partner that you are working with will go a long way with client services in trying to troubleshoot or identify what you are trying to get set up. That shared language will help our team get you to that endpoint there. All right, and then last up here we have some optional services updates. So currently bid modifiers, which is something that is offered as an optional add-on through outside services, is not available through the ping post consent API or dynamic consent form. Similarly, bid experiments are not available for the ping post consent API or dynamic consent form. They are on our roadmap to be worked on. We've had to prioritize. We do see some usage on these, but we'd like to know how important these are for you guys. So we'd like to hear from you and help us prioritize these. So, thank you. That was the last update that we had here. I know there's some questions that we're going to jump on and get to, but that was the last one that I wanted to cover.